So a while ago, while doing a Godzilla marathon with my brother, we decided to play through some of the games. I made a video on Destroy All Monsters Melee, and despite being a goofy, awkward licensed game, it was also very fun, captured Godzilla well, and really worked. That game had its own sequel, Save the Earth, which led to today's oddity, Godzilla Unleashed. A game that decided to move away from the safety of what its predecessors had done and try new things. Of course, this isn't always a bad move, but this game came out in 2007, a Wii game. There's also a PS2 conversion that's built on and plays like the prior two games, and a bizarre DS conversion, both of which I won't be touching. Today, we're just talking about the Wii version. Godzilla Unleashed leaves behind the lighter Heisei-inspired wrestling brawler for something more aligned with the then-current Millennium series. Slower, heavier, more lumbering battles meant to show the weight and power of these massive beasts, although it's a change that I think has a lot of issues, and I don't think the blame is entirely on the Wii. The story is kind of an outlier in regards to this, and I'm bringing it up here because I don't really have a spot to put it elsewhere. Like Destroy All Monsters Melee, it focuses on aliens controlling monsters, which is an extremely Heisei plot that never would have flown in the Millennium era. It's most notable for the fact that it ruins most stages as well as the gameplay. These aliens use crystals to control the monsters, which ruins the novelty of smashing up Tokyo, Sydney, and San Francisco, as they're covered in crystals every which way, making them feel much more alien. It's also worth noting that a lot of missions in the story mode allow the player to fight properly or just go for crystals, a much easier and less tedious option due to the changes in gameplay. I already mentioned the slower pace and bigger hits, but the gameplay has really seen an overhaul that makes the game generally more tedious. There are three primary issues. First, the waggling. You knew it'd be bad, I knew it'd be bad. Attacks are on the A and B button on the Wii controller, which is held vertically alongside the nunchuck for character control. The primary strategy for virtually every character, whose unique attributes have mostly been shaved away, making them all play more or less the same, with maybe a quirk or two, is to hold both A and B and waggle like your life depends on it, eventually driving your opponent to their death after battles that go on for far too long. Other simple actions are also on waggle now too. Jumping is on a flick of the nunchuck, as is dashing, but while blocking by holding Z on the nunchuck, but also grabbing, which is extremely overpowered in this game, and helps cut the tedium down a lot, which has been set to the horrible input of waggling the Wii Remote and nunchuck together, which is horribly inconsistent and usually results in a jump for seemingly no reason. The second big issue is changes to the health system. As opposed to the standard linear health bar present in the prior games, and virtually every fighting game ever, the game opts for a bizarre system of segmented health bars, each of which slowly refills over time and can only be fully depleted with a knockdown hit. This simple change greatly multiplies the tedium of the game. Drain a health bar that feels as long as a whole health bar in Destroy All Monsters, force a knockdown by waggling, and repeat at least 3 times. But the difficulty selection for the game simply increases the amount of health bars enemies have. It's a tedium switch, essentially. There's no dynamicism here, no option to play ranged. Every character except for one needs to eventually approach for a knockdown, and defensive play gets stupid good because you can just block to start restoring your health again and lock your opponents out of being able to do much at all. The third change is to beams, which similarly keep the game very defensive. Instead of restoring over time fairly quickly to keep it as a constant option, energy is restored instead by blocking and holding the beam button, further adding to the slow pace and offensiveness of the game. Besides this, beams do have 2 other minor changes. They increase in damage the longer they're sustained. For some characters, a full charge can drain a health bar, meaning all they need to do is land it, but the charge times are so long that it somehow ends up being more tedious than the waggling. There's also beam clashes. When beams collide, some kind of waggling minigame takes place to see who takes the explosion. I have no idea how this minigame works. Sometimes you waggle your heart out, the explosion hits you, and you lose. Sometimes you waggle your heart out and it works out. Sometimes you just swing your arm once or twice and it works out. It's very inconsistent. I think the visuals also take a hit in a few major areas, primarily the crystals, which I think heavily take away from the fun of smashing up real-world cities, and secondly, like the Millennium series was at the time, the whole game is visually much darker, something that works in the movies where the imposing presence of the monsters is heightened, but not as much here, where the limitations of the Wii make it come off as bland and muddy. Lots of grays and blues without much flair. That said, it's not entirely bad. I think the models for the monsters themselves are good, it's mainly an issue with the world around them. The music also takes a hit. Destroy All Monsters at the very least had a strong opening theme, but Unleashed has nothing memorable as far as music goes. Nothing musically that says Godzilla Unleashed, just some generic stuff to fill in the menus. The game only has a few things to do. Story versus in the shop, which is where points from the story mode can be spent on more characters. The story mode has an extremely odd structure. Each of the factions has a slightly different path. Earth Defenders, the good kaiju, Global Defense Force, the robots, Mutants, the bad kaiju, and Aliens, which are pretty self-explanatory. Although in the end, they mostly go through the same set of missions, with choices offered between multiple depending on the mission. Most of these are extremely unnoteworthy, mostly consisting of killing the opponent or smashing the crystals, although I find the lack of clarity in the objectives funny. Often you'll have ally monsters who aren't marked and attack you with the enemies, but with no benefit to killing them, with really no way of knowing what you're supposed to do until stages abruptly end. Sometimes you'll be in an arena fighting 4 monsters and you'll kill 3 of them, you'll kill all of them and the level won't end and another thing will spawn. Sometimes you'll kill 1 monster and there's 3 left, it just ends. Sometimes you don't even have to kill a monster, sometimes stages just end directly in the middle of them. There are a few notable stages mixed in, 2 boss fights against the Gotengo, a ship from the film Baragon, which became Godzilla canon in Godzilla Final Wars, and the final fight. It's for every faction but the mutants. It's a marathon fight against a bunch of monsters until SpaceGodzilla shows up, while the mutants have a 1 versus 3, where the player is in a permanent rage mode, increasing damage and size, which is tedious but to a lesser extent. The story spans roughly 20 fights, give or take, and is only broken up with static image cutscenes with bad voice acting, 3 for each faction. That amounts to aliens put crystals everywhere, aliens are still here, and yay the aliens are gone. Save for the alien faction, which ends with yay the aliens have enslaved humanity. It's also worth noting that you don't actually have to win fights. If you lose a fight, you still just progress a day and get new stage options. And once you hit about 20, the final boss shows up, so it's odd. It doesn't feel satisfying. I'm going to cover the roster now, but I'm really only going to be highlighting the few unique attributes because most of the characters play basically identically. Minor animation and attribute changes, but the identical gameplay style of hold A and B and Waggle and maybe beam occasionally if you wanna. I'll start with the Earth Defender. This game has 3 Godzillas. The primary one is Godzilla 2000 from Godzilla 2000 Millennium, whose most notable attribute is that instead of a beam, he can shoot a singular fire blast, which is never useful. The other 2 are Godzilla 1954 from the original film, Godzilla, and Godzilla 90s, the Heisei Godzilla who first appeared in The Return of Godzilla. Both of these are clones of Godzilla that trade a little speed for power. That's about it. Anguirus returns, Godzilla's first enemy and eventual ally from Godzilla Raids Again. Instead of a beam, he has a roar that hits through walls but does minimal damage and can't beam lock, meaning he's more or less worse than an average character. Fire Rodan is specifically the Rodan from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, a stronger Rodan revived after death by Godzilla's radiation. Rodan is a flyer, but this amounts to very little in this game, as outside of being harder to hit, his playstyle still focuses on Waggle and Prey. Mothra, who first appeared in a self-titled movie but became part of Godzilla canon in Mothra vs. Godzilla, and eventually became a Godzilla ally, is one of the game's few characters with any kind of interesting gimmick. Starting in her larva form, where she's weak and useless, but at low health, becoming Mothra proper, who like Rodan is a flyer and can also make a cloud of wing dust to block beams. Otherwise, she basically plays like Rodan. Baragon, new to this game, is one of Godzilla's more obscure characters, first appearing in Frankenstein vs. Baragon, no I will not elaborate, and otherwise being relegated to minor roles in Godzilla movies like Destroy All Monsters. Baragon can burrow underground to dodge attacks, and his beam energy automatically replenishes over time, meaning of anyone, he's the best at using beams. King Caesar is another fairly obscure monster new to the game, a one-off ally of Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, where he's summoned to do battle through a mystical ritual. To say something about him as a character, he is small. Continuing the streak of obscure characters, Varan, who has had 2 appearances, as the villain in his self-titled movie, and as stock footage in Destroy All Monsters. I guess I appreciate the deep cut. Varan is small and fast. All of these characters play basically like Godzilla. Varan is small Godzilla. Alright, that was fun. Let's move on to the Global Defense Force. The robots that humanity is built to fend off the invaders. M.O.G.U.E.R.A, usually called M.O.G.U.E.R.A, the Mobile Operating Godzilla Universal Expert Robot Aerotype, first appeared in a very different form in the Mysterians as an alien robot, but in later continuities, specifically Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla, was designed to fight Godzilla, as its overly long name implies. M.O.G.U.E.R.A has terrible melee and is supposed to fight exclusively via laser, while also unfortunately going into standby mode if it runs out of energy, leaving it vulnerable for a very long time while its laser automatically recharges. Most characters are on a pretty similar level to each other, but M.O.G.U.E.R.A stands out as excessively bad. Mechagodzilla 2 from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 was a robot designed to, fight Godzilla, as they all are, but would go out of control and end up being a big problem for Godzilla and humanity. Unlike every other character in the game, Mechagodzilla 2's beam can knock opponents down, making his dominant strategy lasering everything to death for virtually no risk. Kiryu is the 3rd version of Mechagodzilla, who first appeared in Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, the sequel to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. Confusing, I know. Kiryu is like the prior Mechagodzilla, but his beam isn't as useful and he's a bit faster. Jet Jaguar is cool as fuck, only appearing in Godzilla vs. Megalon, my favorite Godzilla movie. He's a friendly size-changing robot who fights along Godzilla. He can change size from normal to small to large, which only seems to affect his speed and power, faster but weaker when small and stronger but slower when big. It's a very meaningless gimmick. Mech-King Ghidorah is a version of King Ghidorah from a future timeline messed with by aliens from Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, the movie with the best poster in the series. He can fly a little. Now for the aliens. Gigan comes from Godzilla vs. Gigan, where he's a cool alien with a buzzsaw on his body and scythe arms. I mean, what else do you really need, I guess? Although this game uses the design from Godzilla Final Wars, where he was dead. You hold A and B and Waggle, and yeah. King Ghidorah is an alien monster who first appeared in Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, as an enemy of Godzilla. While this game uses design from the later Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all-out attack. Christ, this guy only appears in movies that are a mouthful. He plays almost identically to his mecha counterpart, but more physically focused than on beams. Mechagodzilla, the first one, was an alien weapon meant to take down Godzilla, who only appeared in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. He basically plays identically to Mechagodzilla 2, but without flight, including the broken beam that can cause knockdowns, so he is top tier. Megalon is the primary villain of Godzilla vs. Megalon, the best movie, and isn't technically an alien. He comes from an underwater city called Seatopia. He can burrow, and yeah. Orga is the primary villain of Godzilla 2000 Millennium. In-game, he punches and kicks by waggling. Finally, the mutants, starting with Biollante, a living plant turned monstrous by fusion with Godzilla's cells from Godzilla vs. Biollante. Biollante is perhaps the worst character in the game, slow, gigantic, incapable of jumping, and whose tentacles can't hit enemies that are up on her, completely shutting her down up close. She borders on completely unusable. Destoroyah is a crab monster thing given life by the Oxen Destroyer that killed the original Godzilla in the 1954 movie, who only appeared in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. Destoroyah is better than most characters because his powerful horn attacks, which drained his beam energy in previous games, no longer do, letting him waggle it to victory with extremely long range. Krystalak is the first of the kaiju designed specifically for Unleashed, part of a poll from before the game release to decide between a few characters. I don't really like the designs for either. For Krystalak specifically, he's too busy. Most Godzilla monsters are very simple, even the ones that are on the busier end of the spectrum, and Krystalak is just over-designed, plus as if this game needed any more fucking crystals. Gameplay, you say? Waggle? Megaguirus is a giant dragonfly-like kaiju from Godzilla vs. Megaguirus who attempted to destroy stuff because Godzilla needed something to fight. Like Rodan, she's a flyer but also has the unique ability to steal beams. When hit with one, she can fire it back, and thanks to Jank, can do so indefinitely. Steal Mechagodzilla's beam and it's over. Outside of that, she's just a flyer. Obsidius is also a character created specifically for this game and the poll. And yeah, he's a lava monster, right? It's a coolish idea and not nearly as gaudy as Krystalak, but ends up not looking like anything. Obsidius has the unique property of being immune to the residual damage of the lava on the Seattle stage. This is largely irrelevant due to it being limited to one stage, but it makes him extremely good on that singular stage as he can just camp in the lava that quickly kills any other character. Off of this singular stage, Obsidius is pretty fucking bad. His flame breath is short range and weak, and his attacks never seem to land properly. He either attacks the ground inch in front of him, or jumps vaguely at an opponent where the heavily overactive lock-on freaks out and causes him to rocket around to nowhere. But I don't think he's the worst character in the game, he's certainly down there. SpaceGodzilla's first and only appearance was in Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla, serving as the title implies the primary antagonist. He was created when Godzilla's cells traveled through a black hole after being carried by Mothra into space and emerged as an evil alien Godzilla who puts crystals on stuff. SpaceGodzilla is either terrible or too complicated for me. His A and B moves, as opposed to being relentlessly spammable like everyone else's, seem to do strange things. Either summoning crystals that seem to do nothing, or shooting weird pink waves from his head that seem to do nothing. His actual physical attacks are basic and weak, and while his laser is fairly strong, it takes ages to charge. It's certainly possible that something else is going on here that I just don't get, but SpaceGodzilla feels bad unless you can solve that mystery. Lastly, for this game's oddball pick is Titanosaurus, a side character from 1975's The Terror of Mechagodzilla, a once peaceful creature being possessed by a mad scientist to work alongside Mechagodzilla. Titanosaurus hits hard, but its range is miserable. He would be genuinely pretty good if he wasn't so ungodly limited by bad range, even if his laser is pretty solid. Okay, done. Godzilla Unleashed is a big letdown. Destoroyah Monsters Melee had a special place in my heart. It's a tight, simple, dumb fun brawler. Unleashed is somehow a Waggle game where you mash buttons and fill your wrist until everything else is gone, but it's also massively overly complex with its weird segmented health bars and knockdown systems and defensive play. And you can kind of see what they were going for sometimes, with the slower pace and big deliberate swings resembling the movies of the era, but it's just not very fun. Even if the controls were good, and they're not. It wouldn't be fun because it stripped a fast-paced, chaotic brawler into a slow defensive slog, and the controls are just so stereotypically Wii. To its credit, the roster is strong with lots of cool kaiju from all over the series, especially the obscure ones, although because how the game works, none bear any strong standout features that make them interesting to play, and generally the game looks pretty rough, with the monsters being passable but the art direction as a whole being generally iffy, especially because of the crystals ruining every stage's aesthetic. I really wish this was a better game because I love Godzilla, but it is a miserable, miserable slog. It's so bland, it's such a Wii game. It truly is the Wii game of all time.